If you just got a little bit farther, you want to see the Starforge map. Ladies and gentlemen, we're covering Season 2, Episode 1, The Marshal. I think I'm going to save most of my thoughts about this till the end. Yeah, let's just get the desert playlist back. There we go. Okay, let's just get that going. Let's just commit to we're just in the desert. I see a lot of people in chat who are absolutely loving this episode. Anyways, we cut to Mando going through the streets looking for stuff. Do you notice there were stormtrooper helmets like crossed out with red X's in the graffiti? That was a nice little touch. That was some good stuff. I have to admit, seeing the live action, the modern live action take on Gamorreans was interesting. I don't want to sound complainy, because it's still not as good as it could be, for lack of a better way to put that. You could tell what they did is they took two fairly large, legitimately big, muscular guys, and then they put the pig masks on them. But the problem is the pig masks are for people whose body size should be bigger, right? And then they painted their skin green. That's cheap. That's television budget. That's 9 months development time. But that's it. Like, it doesn't look bad, but the whole time I'm looking at it like... Not here to complain. This reminds me of the Twi'lek thing we talked about earlier. So, they go and they talk to, I don't know, One Eye. Yeah, it's no TOS Gorin costume. Oh, God. Oh, God. Listen, naked Gamorreans, they make me feel things. Do you gamble? Not good when it can be avoided. Oh, okay. Well, in that case, I'll offer you all the info in exchange for your armor. Mando just looks at him. Like, really, dude? So naturally, him and his goons have them surrounded and, pull out their blasters and everything's death and blah, blah, blah. I love this little moment. One of the things I do absolutely like about this episode is when Baby Yoda notices that the fight's about to break out. Immediately pops back into the shell and pops the button, closing the lid on it. Right before a much better usage of the whistling, what was it called? Whistling bird? The Beskar missile goes off. By the way, this is a perfect time to show off the Beskar missile. This is a great sequence right here. And he does a good fight, which is overly edited. I swear to God, I'll stop complaining about it the moment they stop overly editing their fight sequences. Like, I have to actually distance myself from watching the show and try to watch the animation, that is to say, the choreography of how they're fighting. Because I could see some good action going on there somewhere underneath all of that editing. And yeah, I loved the vibro axis, by the way. That was very legit. So, of course, now the guy who has apparently been a predator of the Mandalorians is now himself a prey. Once again, we see the similarities between him and the man without a name. Then they go down back to Tatooine. I'm going to come back to that. I know that sounds strange. I'm going to come back to that because there's something this whole show has been doing, or rather, Season 2 especially, Season 3 super especially. No, I'm not going to do it. We all know Tatooine just has a giant black hole in the middle of it. We get it. I am unironically happy to see Peli again. No joke. And it makes a degree of sense that he goes to see her again. Remember that point, though. Just process that in the back of your mind. She was also one of my favorite one-offs in Season 1, so I'm 100% in favor of seeing more of her. I also... Yeah, for R5. There's also this line she said, which is actually really good. She says, "Oh, thank the Force he's okay." Now you're probably thinking, what? That's a weird way to name drop the Force. But actually, I think it's a really smart way to name drop the Force. Nobody reacts to the word. I'm explaining this badly, but imagine if you knew that space wizards exist. Distance, new terminology, and then there's this old word people used to just say about the Force. You get it, right? Like, in other words, the Force is just something you say as like this vague mystical thing that kind of drives us or whatever. And they don't understand that there's a connection point between what the Jedi do and the Force. Point in fact, this is the kind of thing Palpatine did in several works, both in the EU and the AU, to try and turn the Force into this vague, mythical kind of a thing, so people would refer to it in the same way as she does in this exact same thing. Rather than being a tangible daily aspect of their lives, it's some distant whatever thing, right? So her just being like, oh, thank the Force. Yeah, thank the heavens. Exactly. It's the exact same way she says that. That's pretty right. That's pretty accurate to the overall way that this lines up. So I'm actually with that. That's some surprisingly well thought out, quick and dirty exposition. We also get some very good quick and dirty exposition from her, that Tatooine became a free-for-all when the Empire fell. Unfortunately, this is actually badly written, which I'll get into in just a second, because the fact that the Empire fell during Return really has nothing to do with the fact that Tatooine was free. Do you know what really did it? Jabba. Now, I don't know how big of a fish Jabba was in the AU, but in the EU, Jabba was the big fish. Like, the biggest, actually. He was on top of the heap. And so it made a perfect sense that when Jabba gets knocked over, tons of dominoes were left there to throw the entire planet, and honestly, most of the sector, into chaos. Even the Hutts ran around, constantly trying to pick up the pieces, right? And again, I hate to keep referencing the EU, but this was the beginning of multiple story plots in the EU, because his death had left a gigantic power vacuum, not just on Tatooine. So, I'm with it. Cool. Oh god, that does make sense, Rachel, you're right. Ellie also mentions, it makes so much sense that Tatooine would stop being a unified polity, and instead would just become individual city-states, right? Mos Eisley is probably functionally its own individual state at this point in time. Peli even mentions that she doesn't like to leave the walls when she can avoid it. I mean, that's true, Bionic Punk. I can't argue that. But then we start to see... Let me talk about the danger of member berries. I know this is a weird time to talk about it, but hear me out for just a second. Because... the reason I don't let's start with some basic definitions. When I say member berries, I'm referring to bad fan service. It is the terminology I have taken from South Park and used going forward to refer to bad fan service, which is exactly what they used it as well. Hey, you remember that thing? Yeah, I remember. Like, that's where that comes from, right? Fan service is not necessarily bad. Fan service can be good. But if you do it bad, then it's member berries, right? The danger of member berries is, first of all, where exactly good and bad lands is going to kind of depend on you. But second of all, there's also... It is a good question, Blade. It's also so understandable why most creative types, and especially executive types, want to lean on member berries. I don't want to go too far down the rabbit hole on this, because there's a lot that can be said about this in our modern fiction. We have been circling the same IPs for so hard and for so long at this point that it's gotten to the point of ridiculousness. At least amongst certain circles. Especially movies. Anything that's a big property, anything that's owned by any IP that's owned by a large-scale property or a large-scale company, has been circling that drain pretty freaking hard. Now, we do still have creative stuff. We have creative shows, we have creative movies, we have creative stuff on YouTube. We have creative games. You know, there's all kinds of interesting stuff. Like the Indie Circle has definitely been pushing forward a lot of fantastic stuff. There was a recent game that came out where you play a freaking cat in like a pseudo Metroidvania thing, but it's actually a puzzle game disguising itself as a Metroidvania. I can't actually remember the name of it, forgive me. But like, we've been branching out, right? So I don't want to sound too doomer here, but amongst the big properties, which are owned by, no, not Stray, which are owned by a large corporations, which are demanding the highest possible ROI. Oh my god, you're gonna make me look it up. Hang on. Just give me a second. Oh my god. Give me a second. Okay. You did this, Blade. you did this. Animal Well. That's what it's called. Yeah, that's what it's called. I recommend looking into it. It's a pretty interesting looking game. Like I said, it's a puzzle Metroidvania. Made by one guy over several years. And it's being spread by word of mouth, because that's how that works. I'm getting a little off topic. Point is, yeah, the mere fact that we're on Tatooine has essentially opened the door to member berries. And the number of references in this episode is gargantuan. Some of them are very overt, some of them are deep cuts. You can't tell me. I mean, do you think for a second I didn't notice the crate pearl? They didn't even call attention to it, really. They just pull out the pearl and like, hey, we found it. And all I could think of is, that's not going to fit into a lightsaber. But there are references absolutely everywhere, from the extremely overt to the extraordinarily tiny cuts. In fact, I apparently lied to you, because I forgot this was part of this show. I thought it was part of Book of Boba Fett for some reason. So here's a fun little thing. Some of you know I've already covered Justified, a show starring Timothy Olyphant. It's a great show that I couldn't stand just because it was too dark and too realistic, is really what it was. But it's a very, very good show, and I highly recommend it if you can tolerate that kind of thing. So that show stars Timothy Olyphant as essentially a Westerner, your typical gunslinger, right? So when they made the book Aftermath, which is one of the very, very first books of the AU, they actually specifically modeled a character in that, Cobb something, I forget his last name, but Cobb, after Timothy Olyphant's character from Justified. And you already immediately see where this is going, because when they came back to here, they decided the best person who could possibly play that character, now that they're bringing him forward from Aftermath to here, that could be it, Rex, is Timothy Olyphant. So yeah, I didn't know he was in Mandalorian. I thought he was just in Book of Boba Fett, hence the disconnect there. That's what you call a deep cut, right there. But it's amusing, and whether it works or not depends on you, doesn't it? Because, for example, actually seeing a live-action crate dragon for the first time, I was with that. Like, that thing was properly terrifying. But a lot of this was just, and I think I'll come back into this topic in a minute, because this was very kind of, And yes, this is clearly a backdoor pilot, and I want to talk about that in a minute too. So let's scooch forward a little bit. Let's scooch forward. Mando drifts into town on his speeder, down the big central walkway. There's always a big central road going into town. Then he wanders off, gets into the local bar, is looking for the local problem. Local problem walks in. We're gonna have our gut. This is the most Western that this show has been so far, and I'm actually 100% in favor of this whole sequence. In fact, what I love most about it is they got this big tense shootout, like they're going to do the shootout, and then the shaking starts, and Timothy Olyphant just goes, and then walks outside. Like, I loved everything about that. Like, the Western vibes, the walking in, the tension, the banter between the two, and then the, hold on a second. But then we see something, and again, this is properly terrifying. We see the sand being parted as if it was water. In fact, they do a really, really good, really good show of showing the sand, and then the sand shifts as if water as it's moving, and then it goes back to being sand. Everything about that is fantastic. Great visual effects and great design. Again, the way they portray this damn thing is horrifying. Yeah, a legitimate sand sea. And we see the crate dragon, and it eats the bantha, and it's just like, okay! And yeah, this was before the Dune movies, that's right. Dune Part 1. They swim now? So yeah, that's fantastic, and I'm on board with pretty much everything that's happening here. And then the episode immediately loses me. You remember how I mentioned that it was bad writing earlier, that the Empire fell and then the Tatooine split up? Well, it's because of this scene. It's because what we have is a fairly lengthy flashback which is being narrated, which, if that sounds familiar, I had the exact same problem back in Season 1 when it came to IG being repaired. So there's a fairly lengthy flashback, which he is just narrating over. The narration kind of works. The flashback kind of works. Neither of them worked correctly together. And they have to specifically show the repeat footage of the Death Star 2 exploding. Now, we know that the Galactic Empire had a presence on Tatooine, but it was always a minor presence, even in the AU. Like, they had a handful of troops here. In fact, even in A New Hope, most of the troops that were on the planet had come there on board the Emperor's Hammer? Oh, shoot, what is the name of that ship? No, that's the Devastator. On board the Devastator, which was Vader's ship, his ISD. So, like, huh? Why is the destruction of the Death Star 2 all of a sudden something that's, like, everyone is celebrating as the end of tyranny on Tatooine specifically? I'm happy that the Death Star 2 exploded, but that was way shoved into our face, and there's just a disconnect. And also, while they're still celebrating, these miners collective shows up and is like, hey, we're here. Was it really Maverick? That's actually cute. Yeah, no, Tatooine was always Jabba's planet. This is what I mentioned earlier. It makes perfect sense that Tatooine would turn into its current state after the fall of Jabba, not the Empire. So you can feel the disconnect. And of course, the disconnect exists because they wanted to show off the Death Star 2 exploding. You see how the line of member berries is distant because it's not like these events don't really make sense, but you can feel how they're kind of having a few issues. Yeah, and honestly, a few very minor details would completely fix this. And we just see Jabba's barge exploding, right? Instead of the destruction of the Death Star 2. Boom. Huge amount of those issues are polished over really quickly. It would even make sense because if you remember, Jabba's barge exploding happened a little bit earlier compared to the Death Star 2 exploding. So that would give time for the mining collective to show up and start trying to take over towns. But then they just start shooting everyone in there for some reason. Why? Why do these people who have come over... He even flat out says they've come for a slaving thing. And that they just start shooting all the people in the bar. Explain yourself. Yeah, because evil. And you see my problem. To be very clear, before I scooch forward a little bit, I enjoyed this episode, but I don't think it's actually that good of an episode. And I don't want to use this as a particular thing. But you know what this episode reminds me a lot of? Rise of Skywalker. And I know that you're thinking that that's an insult, and I don't really mean it as one. Because Rise of Skywalker is obviously much more distended than this is, right? I mean, the script of Rise of Skywalker is really bad. But the visuals, the presentation, the stylings are really good. There's a lot of good gameplay in Rise of Skywalker. Good moments, good impact, good things. We get to see things in a way we've never gotten to see them before, just like the Crate Dragon, and you see the parallel. The more you think about it, the less sense it makes. The difference is Rise of Skywalker's script was garbage from word go. Whereas this is just, wait, hold on a second. And as I kept going through the episode, I kept having those moments of, hold on a second. And I'm not trying to nitpick. Trust me, I could nitpick if you want me to. Where the hell did he get Anakin's frickin', oh god, I can't think of the name of the thing, the speeder bike thing. Where'd he get that engine? Explain that, right? Like, I could nitpick if you really want me to. No. I'm talking about basic story elements and logic under the hood, right? Lars sold it. So they repeat the footage, and he narrates the story. He gets pissed lucky, they find the crawler. There is one little nice, cool thing I liked about this. The Jawas who have Cobb dead to rights do not even consider for a moment killing him or robbing him. In fact, they pull him on board and give him water. You'll notice they give him water before he opens the thing he's got, which has the crystals he has. That actually makes perfect sense. The Jawas just aren't like that, culturally. They don't think like that. They're traitors. Yeah, the Jawas are kind of bros, honestly. It's one of the reasons I've liked Jawas for so long. They just have a thing where they're far more interested in bargaining with you than trying to take. They're not a thug. Yeah, you can't trade with dead people. Remember, they actually have cultural, like, I hesitate to use the word religious history when it comes to the sanctity of the trade, right? So, yeah, of course they take him in. Of course they give him water. And it's like, all right, what do you got? Oh, you've got sugar. Or, sorry. They don't have an egg. He asks for the armor. Okay, cool. Yeah, they also will salvage things only if they're abandoned. In fact, in several cases, they'll show up and try to look over something and try to see if it's abandoned. If someone comes out to be like, hey, that's mine, you know what the Jawa does? They leave. Because that's active. That's taken. Right? So, Jawas are cool, as they tend to be. And then Cobb goes and takes down a bunch of security guards and retakes the town. Very Iron Man 1 kind of a scene, by the way. And I'm with it. I'm actually completely with them showing him just bodying these people, because it helps to emphasize not only Cobb as a character, that he wanted to go back and help those people, but also the difference real armor makes. It feels silly to point this out, but even in Star Wars, actually having honest-to-goodness armor is a big advantage. It's one of the reasons I will never stop complaining about the Stormtrooper armor. Yeah, he's an amateur in that suit, gets shot once, if you were paying attention. As actually, there's like a moment of, huh? Oh, I'm fine. Like, it was just a second. I love Timothy Olyphant, by the way. He's a great actor. And so he bodies them in return. It's like, okay, yeah, I'm with it. I'm completely with everything that's going on here. And then he's like, okay, then we reach out to the Tuskens. Can I just say, this is going to sound like a weird thing. Some of you who remember watching my KOTOR lore run, I think it was, pretty sure it was the lore run, remembers that I mentioned that I think the Tuskens should be genocided into non-existence. And the reason for that is actually very, very simple. It's because the majority of the EU portrayed the Tuskens in one specific way. They were acceptable targets. They were darkspawn, right? They were zombies. They were stormtroopers. They were Nazis or whatever. And there were very, very, very few things that ever drifted into any other direction back in the EU. They were orcs, right? Like, you get it. Hi, Dick Winter. They were literally torturers and slavers who would mass murder at a drop of a hat. They were the threat. They were the random encounter table for the desert. One thing I have become aware of, and this show is continuing this, is that they're trying to actually turn them into something more like a culture when it comes to the AU. Turning them into a people, as opposed to just a group of mass murderers and slavers. So, okay, I'm with trying to humanize these creatures a little bit. And by creatures, of course, I mean people, because if I'm not mistaken, they don't even have a species. And it's not like they're completely innocent. This is actually what I was tying into, Hazardous. Because they're not completely innocent. They're not. It's not like they're suddenly all candies and rainbows. They did attack the town unprovoked. Now, they claim it's for water, and there's probably going to be some hostility with regards to claims over water. And that's probably one of those generational cycles of hatred kind of things that we're just going to walk away from. But the point is that they attacked the town unprovoked in order to try and take their water, and he killed several of them in self-defense. Cobb did. So, you can see how they're trying to make them better without making them good, and I'm actually in favor of that. It also works for me that the Mando knows their language and knows how to work with them, and is trying to actually talk his way through this whole situation. By the way, the video game parallels continue. Can I just say that? So, alright, I'm with it. Cool. It really is a KOTOR episode. There's a nice line where Cobb says, I've lived on this planet my whole life. There's no such thing as an abandoned Sarlacc pit. Well, there is if you kill it. And this is actually funny, too, because if you remember, canonically, or excuse me, old canon, back in the EU, there was one creature that was a natural predator of the Sarlaccs, and it was the freaking Krayt Dragons. There's an artwork about that, which I've seen before. I don't remember what book it's from or whatever. But it's literally just a Krayt Dragon going, and just eating a freaking Sarlacc. And that's about as terrifying as that needs to sound. So yeah, that has now made the transition into AU. And yeah, that's exactly as terrifying as it sounds. Yeah, I noticed the binoculars are back. This is when I complain about the visual effects. Hear me out for a second. The visual effects of a lot of this episode are actually really good. The aforementioned Krayt Dragon, the sand, like there's some really, really cool stuff on display here. And then there's stuff that looks really cheap. Do you notice that? I sort of understand you need to kind of showcase. You need to allocate your budget in post and your budget in with regards to scene composition to the stuff where you really want it. But yeah, the speeder's moving. That's exactly what brought attention, because I noticed it earlier too. The speeder moving scenes looked cheap. It was strange how PS3 a lot of those scenes looked. Even the little tidbits, like there's this scene earlier where they're on approach, and when he first interacts with the Tuscans, and they're coming down the canyon, it was like, hey, he holds up the arm and they kind of pull up to the shot, and I'm just sitting here looking at, like, that looks really wrong. Like, it was hard to even put into words exactly how wrong it looked to me. But then there's stuff that looks really, really good. It's very strange. I think it's just a distribution of budget and resources here. So, okay, we're going to go ahead. The Tusken are going to work with us. We're going to get the explosives together because they have all the X-mining equipment. Everything's cool. There's this nice... yeah, I noticed that too, actually, Rex. There's this nice tidbit where the Tuskens offer terms of, we're hands off to you, which means your land is now going to be honored as your land, which is a huge deal if you know anything about Tusken, culture and customs, until you provoke us. Notice the way that was phrased, by the way. Nevertheless, that is a hell of a deal from the Tuskens. So, Cobb talks him into it. Cool. And I have to point out that this whole sequence, I'm skipping over like 15 minutes of episode here, because there's not a lot to talk about here. It's some decent stuff, but there's nothing, it's like, okay. And this is when I want to try and talk something out with you guys, because I want you to work with me on this here. Let's change songs real quick. Let's leave Lut Gholein for a moment here. I know the desert's cool and all, but like, why don't we go someplace a little bit more comfortable? There we go. So, I've been trying to figure out what about this show is bothering me. It's a vague thing, ephemeral thing, kind of in the back of my mind. And I can't really put my finger on it. A show, like, it's so intangible. I watched Andor, and it had its hooks into me so hard and so quickly I couldn't even process it properly. Episode 1 of Andor had me. Now, I know Andor's at the higher end of quality, but still, even just the core idea and premise was just like, shkonk, and I was invested. Same thing with Arcane, actually. Both shows just shkonk. I was into it. I was immediately ready and on board with the whole thing. Mandalorian feels not that, but it feels like it should be. It feels like it's on the cusp of actually getting there. And yeah, they definitely do not... That's absolutely a thing. There's a lot of sequences, a lot of scenes where they dumb things down for the audience. Off to meet Dr. Breen. Because they don't trust us, because they don't trust the audience to pick up on things. Whether there's a validity to that or not is not relevant. There's definitely some things about that. So I'm just sitting here going, what am I missing? Now, one thing we do know is that Mandalorian is the Axis show, the fulcrum show for the Star Wars television series. Have you noticed that? Season 3 leans into this hard, but even Season 1 was part of this. We literally just saw the pilot episode for Book of Boba Fett. Like, you caught that, right? This is the launching pad for all of the others of the shows that they would do forward. The Ahsoka show came out of Mandalorian. The Kenobi show was hinted at it from it, and so forth and so on. Yeah, the Mandoverse, exactly. And they're trying to make the Mandalorian the fulcrum show for so many of these other things. And I feel like that was a mistake. Because I feel like the Mandalorian should have been kind of more its own thing. Focus more on the Mandalorian himself, on Baby Yoda, and actually have the two of them doing their own adventures, their own low-level thing. Yeah, keep things insular, keep things contained within their relatively small thing. But instead, what we're seeing is a lot of backdoor pilots. You remember I mentioned that concept earlier. For those of you not aware of what that means, it can be a really bad thing or an acceptable thing. But either way, a backdoor pilot is, okay, I want to sell a new show. It's called Raximus Kills. It's about a serial killer named Raximus who hunts his prey and then slowly drives them insane so they kill themselves, right? But the thing is, I'm having trouble getting that show greenlit, okay? So the best way I could possibly get that show greenlit is I can go ahead and make my first episode of that show in another show that's already currently going. This is cheaper and easier to do for basically every reason in the world. I'd watch that. Rax the serial killer. Yeah, exactly. No, the Shadow Machine show is already on the air. We've already got the set, we've already got the cast, we've already got people hired, we've already got casting directors and set designers and people who have already got all of the equipment set up for makeup and visual effects. We've got the volume, right, because we're talking about modern time. We've got everything in place to already make an existing show. So we just kind of write all the lead up to the Rax show in the Shadow Machine show. That's a backdoor pilot. That can be very, very overt. This is a really old cut example, but back in the 60s, there was an episode of Star Trek, the original series, which wasn't an episode of Star Trek. It was an episode of Gary 7. And it was a show that Roddenberry was trying to get launched. And he just made an episode of Gary 7, which had a couple of scenes which included Spock and Kirk, and that was it, right? It's actually a really crap episode because of a lot of reasons, but not the least which how it treats the principal cast. That's a bad backdoor pilot, but it's the same general concept, right? And you could see how this is happening in this very show. They're trying to kind of make these launches. They're trying to make these other story threads and these other concepts just kind of be baked into this show. Because I'm sorry, well, this episode was enjoyable to watch, and it was. I'm not denying that. This was the prologue to Book of Boba Fett. That's what this really was. Even going after the armor. Yes, I must go after the armor. No, remember his actual goal? His actual goal is to find a Mandalorian, to be able to access one of the other coverts, and then get information from the other Mandalorians to try and get access to their database to find where Grogu is from. Right? But instead, what this is this is going after Boba Fett's armor. Boba Fett's even in this episode, by the way. I don't think I missed that. And we see it's setting up the things with the Tuskens. It's setting up some of the state of Tatooine and how things have completely fallen apart. And you get it. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing. Or I guess I'm saying that wrong. It's not really a terrible thing. But the more I chew on this, the more I think this was not the correct choice. I think if they were going to do one show to be the axis for all this stuff, to be the thing which everyone else branches off from and rotates from, this was not the show to do it in. Like, yeah, this should not have been the Launchpad show. Ironically, and I know this is going to sound funny, because I think there's a... Yeah, I was actually about to bring up Clone Wars. For those of you who don't remember, Clone Wars was exactly the same thing. They established a lot of other shows in Clone Wars. Bad Batch obviously came out of it. Rebels came almost directly out of it. I don't remember the others. There were actually a couple others, and there were other properties that were bouncing off of that as well. And don't forget, Clone Wars also led into some other things, too, like games. Jedi Fallen Order was almost a direct follow-through of Clone Wars in several ways. So you can kind of see how that can work. Having a Fulcrum show can work. But the reason Clone Wars worked was because that was the centerpiece of that era, wasn't it? It was the Clone Wars. It was right there in the title, right? That's right, Tales of the Jedi Emperor. I know there's another one I was missing. That was the centerpiece of that entire era, of that, like, 5-year gap or whatever it is. We'll see, Dr. Witcher. That's the honest answer. So that was a perfect launching point, because so many of the things going through that era had to go through Anakin, had to go through the clones, had to go through the war, had to go through Obi-Wan. I mean, think about how much Mandalorian stuff was established and developed in the Clone Wars. Think about how much they did with Padme in the Clone Wars. They could launch in all directions because the through line of the show was the war itself. Does that make sense? What's the through line of Mandalorian? The through line of Mandalorian, I'll just tell you, is Mando and Grogu. These two are the centerpiece and the axis point of everything else. And that just doesn't have the same level of connection or impact that it could or should in order to so naturally drive into all these other properties. Now, Like I said, is this a terrible thing? No. Mandalorian. You got me on that one. I'll give you that. Yeah, there were even more spin-offs planned, and then there were some financial things that happened with Disney Plus, which I don't want to go down that rabbit hole right now. But they definitely wanted to go full hog on this. Do you remember, some of you probably remember this, this is 2 years ago now, that there was this gigantic announcement during the May 4th celebration of like 20 shows that they had planned. You remember that? Some of those have since been canceled. Some of those have been repurposed. Some of those have been turned into movies. But you remember that, right? It was this gigantic list of things. They were like, yeah, we're doing all this stuff. And I remember at the time looking at that like, I think this is overall the right decision, but you think you're shotgunning a little bit too much, right? So what show should this be instead? Now that is a damn good question. Yeah, I want a droid story. That is a damn good question, because I don't want to... So, okay, here's the short answer. I don't know. The longer answer is what we need to do is we need to sit down, or I guess they need to sit down and decide what is the overall, like what is the through line of return to sequel trilogy? Because that's the era here, right? That's where a lot of these shows come from. What is the centerpiece of this type, this point in history? Because you notice they don't have one. Like, the EU actually had a pretty strong through line. I hate to keep comparing this to the EU. It was the New Republic. The now what? Luke was desperately trying to figure out how to be a Jedi and how to teach other people how to be a Jedi. Leia was desperately trying to figure out how to run a government that barely did that before. Mon Mothma's in the background trying to hold everything together just through sheer force of personality. Akbar is desperately navigating the politics of the situation he hates. Political situation in general is horrible. It was a huge now what, and there was a natural through line for a huge chunk of the EU, right? So there's a lot of things you could branch off stories from that. But that doesn't exist here. That's all been ejected in the AU. I'm not saying that to be mad. What I mean is, that's not what happened. Instead, in the AU, chakunk. Okay, so now there's the New Republic back. And they shut down their military because they're morons. And then the First Order grows. And that's kind of it. I think, this is my opinion, they haven't thought about what the through line is. Or even if there is a through line for this era of history right here. For what's going on here. And I think they need to identify that and then branch off of that, right? That's what I think they actually should have done in this case. So I suppose that's my long answer to you, is I don't know. Like I said, this is kind of a vague, ephemeral idea I had in the back of my mind. Now, someone in chat, I think it was Rax, just mentioned Rangers could have been the centerpiece, right? Like, follow through on the idea of the Rangers and what they're doing and how they've been dealing with a lot of the mess. And that naturally kind of ties into several other things, right? Because that would directly connect over with the New Republic, because they'd have to deal with the New Republic the whole time. They would naturally connect with the more criminal element of things. That would naturally be dealing with the Imperial remnants. They would naturally be dealing with pirates and warlords, right? Like, it naturally follows there in the middle of that. But of course, then they axed Corsino. God, I don't remember her name. Which I don't want to touch on that if that's okay with you all. I don't want to go down that rabbit hole either. There's a lot of rabbit holes I'm avoiding. It's like a minefield. You ever walk out in a garden patch? You step badly into one of those holes. That actually will break your ankle. So you say the Mando intersects with all that. I don't agree. Maybe it could, but it certainly doesn't. Yeah, I noticed that she's suing them. In fact, that's like a couple weeks ago now that's being moved into court right now. I guess I don't actually have anything else to say. It's something that was bothering me throughout season 1, and it's something that is absolutely apparent even in this one episode where I'm just sitting here going, like, this is an entertaining episode, and I don't want to sound like it isn't, but I'm never going to watch it again because there's nothing there. This is Sims music, Sims 3 specifically. Individualized. Now that's an interesting idea. Maybe focus on how fractured the galaxy is in the wake of the destruction of the Empire. And discuss why that's a good thing, a bad thing, and in between. I don't know. Sorry, yeah, you'll notice I'm kind of stopping the discussion here because the rest of the sequence is all a big action sequence. It's a good action sequence, but there's nothing to talk about, right? The crate comes out, you know, rah, and they shoot it, and then it comes out even more, and then, oh, it goes out. Then it comes out from the mountain, and they got to shoot it again. And then it comes out one more time to hit the thing, and then they blow it up from within. And that's it. It does spit stomach acid, which makes perfect sense. Something like this, something that eats Sarlacc, probably needs very, very caustic acid, which means naturally that when Mando got eaten, he's dead, right? Because he doesn't have Beskar covering every inch of his body, and that level of causticity is probably going to just seep into every... Oh, no, he's fine. Okay. Cool. There's the crate peril, and Boba Fett shows up. Okay, cool. I did think it was interesting Mando was willing to lay down his life on this one. Like, that's kind of a weird one. I'm not even sure why, to be totally honest with you. Oh, sorry, he was empowered by the Beskar. I apologize. Yeah, it's a cool sequence, but there's nothing to discuss. That's why I just kind of drifted off into the why this whole show feels weird to me thing. Promise is a promise. He does keep his deals. That's true. I'll give you that. I will say one thing, which I know is going to absolutely have people just telling me that I'm stupid, dumb, and terrible. I don't mind interconnectivity if it's done well. I don't mind having to watch one show to enjoy another show. I don't mind having to play a game to enjoy another game. I don't. As long as it's done well. That's the important part, because it usually isn't. Almost every time we see this kind of stuff, it's like not particularly well set up, not particularly well paid off, and even the connecting threads are barely necessary. That's the real problem there. Like, I cannot tell you how many times it's like, go watch this in order to watch this, and I'm like, well, but you could summarize the events of that matter for this in one scene. Oh, you also do, because it's still in the second work. Yeah, you know me, I'm more case by case when it comes to that kind of thing. I just thought I'd mention it because it came up in discussion about this very concept of how do your homework Star Wars has gotten lately. Anyways, so we have to rate the Marshal. I'm thinking blue, maybe green. Okay, I shouldn't say this. Wikipedia effect. I'm actually thinking yellow, in all honesty. As a reminder, yellow means good. It's right there. I even wrote up the words. I'm thinking yellow for this one. This is a solid and enjoyable romp, which falls apart the more you think about it. That just screams yellow to me. I think I'm gonna go with that. I've been chewing on this whole time. Oh, yellow is definitely the floor. There's no way this dips down into not good. Honestly, the gunslinger really is the only thing that this whole thing that made me go. I enjoy a good bowl of popcorn just as much as anybody else. And like I said, I enjoyed this episode. Next episode is The Passenger. Season 2, Episode 2. I noticed they label these weird, by the way. So, it's chapter, like, 10, I think. Yeah, sure, hit me with a warning, because I was just about to cut. I'm going to grab lunch, by the way. Because, you know, I need arachnophobia. Okay. So, like I said, I'm gonna go grab lunch. The next episode is... Hang on, let me pull up the next episode. If it'll ever load. Here we go, The Passenger. This is gonna be... Oh, this is a much shorter one. So, yeah, this is only about 32 minutes long. So, yeah, lunch, this, give me like 45, 50 minutes, and I'll be back.